We're going to start today with Law and Justice and our Law and Justice lead as we hear for the first time from Judge Eileen Cannon, the Trump-appointed judge who will preside over the federal criminal case against the former president. Today, Judge Cannon gave attorneys 5 days to notify her on the status on the necessary security clearances they need for the classified material in the case. This, as the Washington Post reports, that one of the former president's attorneys proposed a plan to Trump last fall to attempt to stave off a potential indictment, planning to, quote, quietly approach the Justice Department to see if he could negotiate a settlement that would preclude charges, hoping Attorney General Merrick Garland and the department would want an exit ramp to avoid prosecuting a former president. Trump reportedly rejected that approach, the Post says, at the urging of some of his more combative outside advisors. But one source is casting doubt on the practicality of that proposal, telling CNN it wasn't a real opportunity to avoid charges. Donald Trump continues to lash out at special counsel Jack Smith and at the Department of Justice, calling Smith on his social media site deranged and blaming, quote, misfits, mutants, Marxists, and communists for the criminal charges. That's a quote, which, while not necessarily helping his legal case, is apparently helping his campaign coffers. His team claims it has now raised more than $7 million since his federal indictment was announced last Thursday. We're going to begin with CNN senior legal affairs correspondent Paula Reed, who's following all of the latest developments for us. Paula, why is this order from Judge Cannon significant?
One of the big tensions right now in this case is timing. How long will it take this to get to trial? Special counsel Jack Smith says he is pushing for a, quote, speedy trial. We know the former president and his attorneys have every incentive to try to drag this out at least until after the election. Now, we know where they stand on this, but the judge has a lot of control over how quickly this moves. And this is the first scheduling order she has issued, and she's moving along pretty quickly here. 2 days ago, we had the arraignment. She's saying, look, by 5 days from now, I want an update on where you are with your security clearances. That's an important issue here, right? Because we're dealing with classified information. But she's under a lot of scrutiny, and a big question here is how quickly will this move? Now, in order to get their security clearances, the Trump team needs to know who exactly is going to be on the team. So that's another sneaky way that this could get dragged out a little bit, right? They have to find the lawyers, and then it'll take a few weeks to get the clearances. Jake, all this feels a little in the weeds, right? Sort of real minutia, but the minutia matters in this case because these little tiny decisions are how this can get extended, and these little tiny decisions have an impact on a case that could have an enormous impact on the country, depending on when it's brought.
These security clearances also underline the fact that you need security clearances to see this information, which is kind of interesting. Whether this plan that we read about in the Washington Post from this Trump attorney to negotiate with the Justice Department, whether or not it would have succeeded or the Justice Department would have even been amenable to it, it does raise questions about all the choices Donald Trump could have made differently since leaving the White House to avoid the indictment and the arrest and such.
Yeah, the best way to make good choices is to make sure your advisors have all the information, right? According to the indictment, the former president was not only trying to hide documents from the feds, he was also trying to hide them from his own lawyers. And I'm told by sources close to the legal team that that was one of the reasons that he wasn't always getting the best advice. They didn't always have the full picture. For example, that recording of a conversation where he says he has classified information, his lawyers didn't even know about that until a few months ago when it came up in the grand jury. But we know throughout this process, Jake, he's been getting conflicting advice. Some people have been encouraging him to be more cooperative, more conciliatory with the Justice Department. Others were saying, no, fight, fight, fight. It's clear, right, which philosophy won out, and that's partly how he got himself here.
Interesting. And Trump appointed Judge Eileen Cannon. She's going to preside over this case. She won't ultimately be deciding Trump's guilt or innocence. That will be a jury. But are there ways that prosecutors might be concerned about decisions she makes that could influence the case? Yeah,
and they have reason to be concerned because the one decision that she has made in a matter related to this case, relating to the search of Mar-a-Lago, was roundly criticized by legal scholars on both sides of the aisle and eventually overturned. She is a young, inexperienced federal judge, and this is arguably the case of a lifetime. So she's going to be under a lot of scrutiny. And Jake, there's so many ways that she can influence this case. Everything from jury selection, right? Which jurors get struck for cause, to bigger questions like which evidence will those jurors eventually get to see? And I think that's really going to be the first test for her, because we know the Trump legal team, they want to revisit all of these fights that they've already had in D.C. about evidence that got in. They want to revisit those in front of Cannon. But she's going to be a major storyline here because of the power she wields over this proceeding.
All right, Paula Reed, thanks so much. Joining us now to discuss, Alberto Gonzalez, former Attorney General in the George W. Bush administration. We should note that in 2008, a Justice Department report concluded that Gonzalez handled classified a document in an insecure fashion at his home and in an insufficiently secure space at work, but found no evidence of any unauthorized disclosure or statute violation. Thanks so much for being here, Mr. Attorney General. The Washington Post reports...
Thanks for the reminder, Jake.
Well, I feel like we do need to disclose it, and also we don't want anybody overhyping what happened, since you were not referred for any charges at all. So we want the full...
Well, and the lesson is, I mean, people take this seriously.
Yeah.
We need to take this seriously. So that's the lesson from that little incident.
Yeah. The Washington Post reports that Donald Trump rejected this plan from one of his attorneys in the fall of last year to quietly approach DOJ to arrange a settlement in the classified docs case, give them an off-ramp so they wouldn't have to be put in a position of prosecuting the president. Is that something you think DOJ would have entertained?
Well, they certainly would have, I think, entertained the conversation to see what the offer really is. And the timing would have been critical, quite frankly. If it was before the search, certainly I think the chances would be greater about serious entertainment of such a request or offer. After the search, probably not so. But always being mindful of the fact this would be an unprecedented search, an unprecedented prosecution. And you want to get it right. You also want to be fair. You want to be fair to the former president. And so, yeah, it's hard to tell whether or not it's something we would seriously consider. We might have, depending on the circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at the actual indictment, the president is not charged for documents that he did turn over, and that leads one to conclude that if he had maybe just turned over everything when originally asked, then there wouldn't be any charges at all.
Jake, I feel that would be the case. I really do, because it really isn't good for the country to have a former president charged, brought up on federal charges. And so I think, listen, there is mishandling of classified information, Pence, Biden, Clinton, and so it happens. Most of the time it's inadvertent. People aren't as careful as they should be. But as soon as they're made aware of it, they fully cooperate and return the documents or make them available to the National Archives. For whatever reason, Donald Trump didn't do that here.
Yeah.
And that's the reason why he's facing these indictments, precisely because he was unwilling to provide the information.
There are very few lawyers who like it when their client talks publicly about the case. I want you to listen to what Donald Trump said to his donors at his Bedminster fundraiser about this on Tuesday.
I hadn't had a chance to go through all the boxes. It's a long, tedious job, takes a long time, which I was prepared to do, but I have a very busy life.
I mean, isn't that essentially an admission of guilt of sorts from the former president? He's admitting that he had the documents, he's admitting he didn't turn them over.
Well, I did hear him say that he really hadn't gone through all the boxes. Maybe perhaps wasn't sure. I think I may have heard somewhere that what he said was that in many of the boxes were, clothes and shoes and things of that nature. I don't hear anybody from the Department of Justice who's gone through these boxes confirm that, in fact, there were, personal effects of the former president. So I think President Trump has really gotten himself in a very difficult position. Again, if he's entitled to a fair trial, presumption of innocence until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. But the evidence, what's the assertions, the allegations in this indictment is really quite compelling. And I have to believe that there's more that wasn't included in the indictment that may be even more damning, more dangerous for the president. So if I were advising the president, I would really tell him that there's, as my colleague, former Attorney General Bill Barr says, even just half of this information is proven true. The president is in some deep trouble.
I think Barr said toast, but yeah, I hear you. Former
He did.
Former Attorney General Alberto Gonzales, thanks so much for your time today.